All right. Hey everyone, I am Angela from Angela Wolf Video, and this is Video Tech Tuesdays. So every Tuesday I'm doing live stream to talk about different video tech specs and gear, which is something that is always near and dear to my heart. Plus I want to just kind of share my knowledge about video stuff with you guys and with everyone who's kind of out there thinking about maybe they want to, dabble in video, or they have a brand that they need to be doing, weekly or daily, like video updates for their customers, stuff like that. So today we are talking about used gear. So buying something used, which is really a great option for people who are just starting to get into video or doing it for a hobby. And the stuff we're talking about today also applies to photography gear as well, if you're looking to kind of dabble in photos. So as we're watching, I'm going to try and keep an eye on my Facebook Live in case anyone has any questions. They can post on there. If you're watching this not live, no problem. Just add your question with the hashtag replay so I know that I didn't get a chance to answer it today and I can answer it in a later live stream. So we're going to be jumping on here, making sure everything looks like we're good to go. Maybe 1 second, and we're going to make sure my live stream's running. Yes, perfect. All right, there's always this little delay and it gives me a heart attack. All right. So this question about used gear actually came as a recommendation from someone who's been watching our videos. So thank you, Claire. And her question was, if she wants to buy used gear, how do you do that? How do you do it so that it you're not getting ripped off, and how do you do it so that you're, saving money in the long run versus just kind of putting money into gear that's going to break in a year? So what we're going to first kind of talk about is, what kind of gear is good to buy used, where can you buy it, and then what you should look for when you're buying used gear. And lastly, I kind of want to go over just briefly about buying gear on credit, because I think that is something that can really help if you're kind of on the fence about buying a piece of gear. Is always, the question of money. But I don't want you to fall into the trap of buying, all this wonderful gear and then having like a load of debt that you can't pay off because you went through and just like racked up your credit cards for gear, which is so tempting, let me tell you, but we don't want to do that. So first, buying used gear, is it a good idea? Honestly, if you're jumping into anything, I really think it's a great idea. I've bought both cameras and lenses used. And when I, first got out of college, all my gear was used. I bought it secondhand because I was a poor out of college student. So I really didn't have a ton of money, but I needed the gear to start up my business. I couldn't, it's that kind of weird question of, you need money to make money. So I used a lot of gear that was used. And then as I kind of continued on, I switched over to buying new gear. I still buy lenses used because that is something that doesn't really go obsolete. You can find a really good lens that, came out 10 years ago and works perfectly just the same way as it did then. Cameras, on the other hand, like all technology, will go obsolete, and the older model you buy, the sooner it'll go obsolete. So something like, I'm a Canon person. I have bought Canons pretty much all my life. So I really started out on their T series when I was first trying out getting gear for myself. So right now they're all the way up to the Rebel T7i, I believe, is the newest model that they have. So if you were to go online, you're probably going to find a lot of, T6, T5s that people sold so that they could upgrade to a newer model. Those are totally fine. I wouldn't go all the way back down to a T2 to buy, because it's going to be old. It's not going to have all the features you want it to have. And there's just more chance that it's not going to last very long. So another thing you want to look at when you're buying anything used is for known problems that gear has. So of course you want to first do your research on the specific type of gear you're looking for. So if there's a lens that you really would like, look up the specific lens first, apart from looking it up used. Don't just say, hey, I want a lens. What's on eBay today? Know what type of lens you want, what you want it for, and what you want it to do. And then, check it out. Like, whoops, don't mind me. So look it up, is this lens known to have a faulty flex cable? Does that break easily? Maybe it's not dust sealed, and so it tends to bring in a lot of dust and get clunked up inside. Those kind of known problems means that the lens is going to be have a much shorter lifespan and most likely is going to come to you damaged if it's already used. So just things to be aware of about any piece of gear, whether you're buying it new or used. You definitely want to know about known problems, and that's something you can Google pretty easily. So we're going to be talking about, where do we buy this used gear from? So if you are someone who wants to play it safe and you don't mind spending a little bit more money for that, to make sure that it's for that safety idea, you're going to want to go with a local gear rental or B&H used. So either B&H online has a used section of like refurbished used gear that they have. And then also, any of your local gear rental houses will most likely be selling used gear as well. There's a bunch of them in Philly. Any major city is going to have a gear rental house. And those places are going to have, they're going to have taken better care of the gear. They're going to have refurbished it, cleaned it, made sure it worked. And then if for some weird reason it actually doesn't work when you get it, there's someone to return it to. It's a company. They're going to give you your money back. You can probably pay with a credit card, which means, if all is lost and it's terrible and you can't use it, you can always do a chargeback on the card. So kind of that's like the safety net, is using B&H or local gear rental house to buy your used gear. That being said, like I said, it's going to be a tiny bit more pricey. It's kind of like the idea of buying a used car from a dealership versus buying a used car directly from the owner of the car. So that kind of gives you that idea of, all right, what's going to be the safe bet. The next place to look, if you're still looking for a really good deal, is going to be Facebook Marketplace. On here, it has its own weird kind of thing you have to look for. So having something that's local means you can meet up the person in real life, try out the gear, make sure it works, take a good look at it before you have any money exchange, which is wonderful. The problem with Facebook Marketplace, however, is that unfortunately there are people who go around and they steal people's gear, out of cars, out of houses, anywhere. They go, they steal gear, and then they try to resell it. So when you're doing something like that, you want to make sure that you're not buying stolen gear. For lots of reasons, you don't want to buy stolen gear. So when you're talking with someone on Facebook to buy gear from them, make sure they really know what they're talking about, that they know the exact model that they're selling, that they're not just selling a Canon camera. That they're selling the 5D Mark III, something like you want specifics. You want to know when they bought it. You want to know why they're selling it. Is this something that they're just upgrading their gear and getting rid of old stuff? Or is there, it doesn't really work right, people aren't going to tell you that, but you want to know why they're selling the gear. And again, just to be able to kind of assess out, does this sound like someone who's never picked up a camera before? So then why are they selling a $3,000 camera, right? Just kind of using your head on that. And then last place I would suggest is eBay. And again, it's got its own ups and downs. I've actually bought a few things off of eBay that were used. Of course, you definitely want to look at the person's ratings on eBay, which is really great that they can tell you, your seller's ratings, how happy people are with it, how much they've sold. And then another thing that's really great about eBay is that you can use PayPal and PayPal credit to pay for it, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Not great thing about eBay is that you kind of have to wait till they ship it to you, right? And you can't test out the gear ahead of time. But I do know that PayPal has kind of a built-in kind of like money back guarantee a lot of times, so that if, you know, what you get is not what was advertised, a lot of times you can work with PayPal to get your money back. So eBay is one of those things you got to just kind of be a little bit weary about. Just do your research about it and make sure you do you work with a seller who has a lot of really good ratings and not someone who maybe is like, this is their first or second thing they're selling on eBay. So you guys know my name. You don't need to see that anymore. All right. So now what are we going to be looking for in used gear? Let's say that you did your research ahead of time. You're like, hey, I want a 5D, either a Mark III or a Mark IV is going to work great for me. I want it used. Now what do I do? So biggest thing that people I see argue about online about using or buying used gear is the shutter count. So that is something that is kind of more of an old school way to determine how much use a camera has gotten. It's something that works very well for photography because every time you take a picture, your shutter goes and the camera counts that, right? So if you're using an old school DSLR or SLR just for pictures, the shutter count is going to tell you how much it's been used. It doesn't tell you if it's been handled, you know, very carefully by a professional or handled by your Uncle Joe who doesn't know what he's doing, right? It doesn't tell you any of that kind of stuff. It just tells you how much it's been used. Typically for like, I don't know, just like personal use, you can expect around 10,000 clicks for a year. But again, something like a video camera, you know, again, the 5D Mark IV does both photos and videos. While when you have it on video mode, it only does one click for the shutter, and you could have it running for the 30-minute maxed out timeline. It doesn't count the minutes it's been running, it just counts how many times it's been clicked. So because of that, it's not really a great indicator for video if you're looking to use the camera for video use. And then also if it's a mirrorless camera like the new Canon R series, it's not going to have a shutter count because the shutter count's about how much the mirror moves, and there's no mirror in a mirrorless camera. So that's kind of just something to keep in mind is the shutter count, but I really wouldn't put a ton of emphasis on it. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, you want to find out why the person's selling the gear. You know, is this something, like I said, I bought a 7D from another shooter in Philly, you know, years ago, and they were just ready to upgrade. They were actually switching all their stuff over to Sony. They were getting things that were 4K compatible, you know, stuff like that. And so it made sense for them to get rid of this older model of a camera. And I got a good deal on it. So it worked out great. Again, on eBay, you want to check for seller reviews. And then when you go in person to examine the gear, you want to make sure, do all the ports on it work? You know, things like HDMI cables get yanked out of the back of cameras all the time. So you want to kind of make sure that like all the ports work. You can plug things into them. It charges, it connects to the computer, it connects to a monitor, connects to anything you want to use, you want to connect it to basically. You want to, of course, look for external damage. Is there, you know, is the screen all scratched up in the back? Is there like dents in the body? And while some damage is going to just be really external and it might just be cosmetic, you do also want to think about, okay, well, if there's a dent in here, maybe the dent itself isn't going to really mess up anything about you taking a picture, but that means it fell. Someone dropped this, and so there might be some internal damage that you can't see that dent is telling you about. So stuff like that. Of course, for a camera or for a lens, honestly, you want to make sure that all the sensors are working and that the connection works. So if you're buying a camera, make sure you have a lens. If you're buying a lens, make sure you bring your camera, and you can connect the two. Make sure the sensors talk to each other. Make sure that you can control the aperture settings and the ISO and all those fun things. Your autofocus works, that kind of stuff, and that's all through the sensors on the lens to camera. And you want to make sure that connection works well before you buy either. If you're buying a camera, open it up and look, just take off the lens and look inside, check the mirror and the gate, make sure there's no scratches in there. Little bits of dust is something that you can easily clean out, but make sure there's like no oil or gunk or scratches, because all of those are bad signs. And then lastly, take a picture or a quick video of either just like the bright sky, a white wall, something that has pretty much nothing in the picture, and then go through and really carefully look at the picture and the video to make sure that there's no scratches on there, that you don't see any weird marks coming up in the video or on the photo itself. And sometimes you're going to need to look at it either on a computer or bring like an external monitor, because looking at a little tiny picture this big is going to be really hard to find a scratch, versus if you kind of blow it up on a computer screen, you can be like, oh wait, there's a huge scratch right here that I didn't notice before. Those are just kind of the things you want to take into account before you purchase anything. Now, lastly, like I mentioned, the idea of buying gear on credit. So I know pretty much the only reason to buy used gear is because you're trying to save money, which is totally understandable. Gear is expensive, and if this is something that you're just jumping into or you're doing it as a hobby, you probably don't need to go out and be spending tens of thousands of dollars on gear. Now, if there is a brand new version of something that maybe it has better features than the old version, maybe it's just a little bit, nicer is the wrong word, but maybe it has these, like I said, features that you're going to be using often. The difference between different types of autofocus for depending on what you're using it for could be a game changer, and that you need to bump up to the latest model. And so maybe in that case, buying the gear on credit makes sense. Again, I really want to strongly put a warning out there about buying on credit, because I am very against racking up credit card debt if you don't have to, So one thing that I do to buy new gear that I know I'm going to be using, first off, my number one rule when I buy gear now, I've had to set this rule for myself, is I can't purchase gear until I'm going to use it on a shoot. If I don't have a scheduled shoot coming up that I know I will use this piece of gear on, I'm not buying it yet. It goes on a list of things I want to buy. I'm going to buy as soon as I can. But if I don't have a paying gig coming up that I need this gear for, I'm not buying it. So that's my first rule of thumb. Second, then I like to use PayPal credit for buying gear. You can use it on B&H, takes PayPal credit, and eBay takes PayPal credit. So it's something you can use for both used and new gear. And what's really nice about that is they offer 6 months of free interest-free financing. So that means if you pay off the full amount within that first 6 months, you don't have to pay any interest on it. So you go from owing, $600 up front to, I only have to pay $100 every month, and I don't pay any interest, and it doesn't get, reported to the credit bureau. That's really nice. And that might be the difference between getting a used piece of gear or getting a new piece of gear, is saying, hey, I've got 6 months to pay this off. I know I'm going to use this in 1, 2, maybe 3 gigs over the next 6 months that will help pay for it. And I will be able to pay the whole thing off in that 6 months. If you can't pay it off in the 6 months, I don't suggest using PayPal credit, because that's that day after you reach that 6 month mark, you get charged interest for the whole 6 months that you've been using it. The interest rate's rather high, and I think paying interest is just wasting money, and you might as well have bought it used, because now you're just wasting all this money on interest that goes to nothing, right? Another thing that people like to do is put a bunch of gear on their credit cards. You can get a new credit card, and a lot of times they have introductory rates where you can get 0% financing for the first 18 months of the credit card. Something like that, again, say, hey, I know I'm going to be using this gear. I know I'm going to make the money back in, 3 or 4 or 5, gigs, and I'll have that many gigs over the life of the promotion. And I will pay this all off in the promotional time. that's when I say, cool, get that credit card, buy that gear you need for it, and pay it off in that promotional time so you're not doing any interest. So those are kind of like my suggestions for if you want to buy gear with a credit card. And again, both of those can be used for either new gear or old gear. If you're doing something like eBay or B&H used. Of course, if you're going to be buying from a person directly, you're going to most likely need to be using cash. And that's where we get, again, a little tricky, where you want to make sure that you can be in person to physically look at the gear, inspect it, try it all out before you hand over a wad of cash and never see this person again. So those are kind of my kind of steps on looking at what type of gear to buy used, where to buy it used, how to buy it. And like I said, that's something I've done in the past. And as I've gotten, building up my brand, needing more out of my gear, wanting to use it for longer, I've switched over to pretty much buying everything new now. So that's just kind of what I wanted to review today. If you have any questions, be sure to comment below with the hashtag replay if I didn't get to answer them today. Nope, wrong one. There we go. And now we have a free branded video checklist. If you go to bit.ly/AWV checklist, download that for free, and that's going to help you with your branded videos, getting your branded video project started up. That is what my company does. Angela Wolf Video creates branded videos for corporations, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. So we are just sharing some of my knowledge that I've gotten, the questions I go through with all of my clients before we even begin working on a video project. Basically, I just put it all into a checklist format, and it's super easy to download. So be sure to check that out. And if you have any questions about video gear, about video tips, feel free to comment on this video or send me a DM either on Facebook or Instagram at Angela Wolf Video. Perfect. Well, it's been great talking with everyone, and I hope you have a great